Hello, everyone. My name is LeiLani Cauthen. I am the CEO and publisher at the Learning Council News, Media, and Research Organization and a proud Edu Jedi Leadership Society Grand Master. We're going to have a great conversation today about data and deputization of parents, which is something that's been happening all over the nation. So I have with me as guest today, Dr. Barbara Nesbitt, who's the Assistant Superintendent for Technology Services from the School District of Pickens County, South Carolina. Dr. Matt Waymack, who's the Director of eCLASS Development, Gwinnett County Public Schools, Georgia, and Tisha Mesa, Campus Instructional Technologist from Heights High School, Houston Independent District in Texas, as well as Marcus Kingsley, who's the VP Sales for SchoolStatus. So let me give you a little rundown of what we're going to be doing today. We're going to be talking about the increased communications, particularly with parents, and what's kind of happened with that dynamic over the course of the last year, because it's probably not going away. And as well as things like transcription, in places in the South and in California, you have a really dire need for transcription of communications going on with parents. What does one-to-many communications look like coming from teachers? Message retention, what your legal requirements are, and then off-grid and missing students, which is happening to the tune of between 20 and 35% of students just missing during the pandemic and sort of continuing now. And then what about data? So let me just give you a little bit of a highlight. Actually, let me come back to that. I'm gonna first pass the screen to Marcus, our sponsor, so we can hear a little bit from him, so he can help actually also frame out parts of the conversation. But just heads up to Barbara, Matt, and Tisha. This is sort of the order of things that we're going to be going through on questions. I think you guys have been given questions in advance. So get ready for that. And Marcus, handing the screen over to you for right now.
Okay, well, thank you for the introduction. Of course, I am mindful that this is merely the warm-up act before we get to the main discussion topics. So I would just like to take a few minutes of your time just to introduce the SchoolStatus platform and hopefully provide some insight and background as to why we're excited to be involved in today's conversation, specifically in the area of data usage in schools and the increasingly important role that parents now play in supporting their children's academic success. So what is SchoolStatus? So think of it as a platform comprising three key components, primarily data analytics and teacher-to-parent communication tools. So, of course, every school district, and we'll be talking about this extensively later on today, captures and retains a wealth of student information and data, ranging from the key academic metrics, so your assessments and grades and benchmarking and all that good stuff, to perhaps non-academic metrics, such as the absences and fractions, ethnicity of student populations and demographics, and then student and parent contact information and much more. And the big perennial challenge for districts, of course, in the face of this growing need to collect and store the volumes of data, is that often those data points are such as your SIS and your LMS and your state benchmarking and assessment. They're often located in silos or inaccessible programs and applications, which makes it difficult to access when needed most and by the people who need it most. So then once that data is actually accessed, is it in a format that allows it to be filtered, to be manipulated and so on? Is it actionable data, or is it visualized in a way that then allows for informed decision making? So with the SchoolStatus platform, we extract and we aggregate the data from all those interesting data points, so your SIS, your LMS, etc., and we provide it in a single, easily digestible and accessible location that, of course, is also scoped, so only educators have access to those students they have control over. And then once we actually collect all that information off that platform, we then pair it with a range of powerful communication tools that allows for parental outreach, giving teachers the ability to have meaningful data-informed conversations with parents about the progress and the learning outcomes, whether good or bad, for their children. And all those communication efforts, whether successful or not, they're then recorded and they're saved to a student card for future reference, in turn removing perhaps some of the inefficiencies that we see presently of having to maintain manual logs. And so directly from that student card, which you can see here, we can communicate directly based on either a preferred contact or a parent via text, email, phone, and shortly video chats as well. And of course, for privacy purposes, if an educator chooses to use their phone, their personal number is masked by a uniquely provisioned number that's then used for future engagement with that parent moving forward. So what's some of the challenges or the barriers to effective communication with parents? So first of all, accessibility. I think we're all lucky here that we have access to the latest and greatest technology, smartphones, etc. But sometimes, a proportion of the population still doesn't have that. They have the traditional flip phone, or they don't have constant access to the internet. And so does those tools that you're using require apps to be enabled, which can be a barrier to adoption for certain parents. Relevance. I'm sure I'm like everybody else here, which is I'm a parent. I have 2 children in the same school district, and at times I receive a barrage of communication from that district, of which some is relevant and some is less so. And so I have to admit that at times I become somewhat desensitized to some of those messages. But if they're more personalized or they were data-driven conversations, I'm far more likely to engage with those messages. And for districts to be able to do that quickly, they need quick and easy access to that actionable data. And then, of course, language. So statistically, we know that learning outcomes for things like ELL students, etc., are lower. So it stands for a reason for parents who perhaps don't have English as their primary language. They may struggle to communicate, less likely to engage, unless the district's outreach attempts are offered in the native language. So having solutions that automatically translate, transcribe both outbound and inbound communications can help raise that parent responsiveness, but also remove what sometimes is a manual process for having to manually translate messages that are going out. And then the tracking and the recording element. So having a solution that tracks and records all those communication attempts not only removes the kind of miscommunication, the he said, she said type conversations that sometimes parents have with teachers, but it allows also for compliance reasons, for FERPA requirements, etc., and then allows to analyze that communication data so you can proactively identify very quickly if inadvertently some students have been left behind or their parents have been somewhat forgotten and not sufficiently engaged with. And then the last slide on this, you'll be pleased to know, is why do we use the data-informed communication to drive engagement? What's the benefit? Well, I think it's universally accepted that the best predictor of student success is the extent to which families encourage learning at home and involve themselves in their child's educational journey. And so while teachers and parents do have a common goal, they have a complementary but different skill sets. And parental involvement can obviously lower things like infractions, reduce absenteeism. Two-way communication between parents and teachers commits those students to daily attendance and raises class participation levels. It can even help with student retention. Engaged parents tend to think more highly of teachers, which not only improves teacher morale, but also elevates the perception of that district in the eyes of those parents. And then finally, reaching the marginalized. I think there's a lot of anecdotal evidence that children from disadvantaged backgrounds and pupils with learning difficulties have experienced a particularly difficult time during the last 12 months and COVID with the home learning type phase, which raises that whole broad term now of learning loss. So being able to use data to proactively identify students who have been most heavily impacted by the impacts of COVID, based on perhaps their academic performance, but also their non-academic performance, maybe trends in absenteeism, in infractions, etc. That will be one of the most effective paths that we have in reducing the achievement gap in post-COVID school environment. And so to do so, we need to deputize those parents and involve them more. And that was a very quick whirlwind tour of the SchoolStatus platform.
Well, thank you
Sure.
very much, Marcus. Thank you for doing this. And I think it's a very deep conversation, which is what we're going to have now with our panelists. So I'm going to take back the screen and share again just some data so we're more teed up on what's happening out there, and then hearing from our panelists would be great. So right now, the national survey, which I said is partial data return, but enough to be nationally significant, we actually went into and asked a couple of questions. The first one I want to share is the estimated hours per week, and this is the teacher returns. This isn't the administrative returns. And we've already had over 1,037 responses just on that side of the survey. How many hours do you spend on that back and forth digital traffic of assignments, logins, which content the student's supposed to have, student and parent email, systems monitoring, checking app notifications, messages, anything that isn't just the distribution and administrative function, or is that versus the instructing students live? So what I found significant is that 30% are saying they're spending 10 plus hours a week doing this. 18%, 5 to 10 hours, 2 to 5 hours a week is 33%. Some of the I just put some of the comments on the screen as well. So, one of the people said, we're doing this every day. It's ongoing. And then another sends out weekly messages to parents to provide them information. There's a lot of this traffic issue going on that we really didn't have as much of when things were in the physical environment, right? So suddenly if you're having, constant pings on your mobile and constant email coming in back and forth, it's really easy to lose track of who you communicated to and who you didn't communicate to. And the thing is I know even as a CEO, I can get, texts at night and I'll open them and think to myself, I'm going to respond to that tomorrow. And then I forget, right? So this is the kind of thing that's going on. And if you do that kind of thing routinely as a teacher with so much more traffic, you can have parents and even students start to feel marginalized, even though you're not really intending for that to happen. So this is the other thing we asked. Please check items, and this is just 2 of the many we asked about, that describe your experiences in the past year with shifting roles. Okay, so this is new. This is what they're saying is new for them. 59% are having to track down students for attendance or for study. Okay, this includes now, even if you're back in school, you probably still have a percentage of students that are remote, and then 61% are site having to manage after hours work. Okay, so that means they're doing work on their mobiles and from their laptops at home at night, which is also a new thing for a lot of teachers. So that's just, besides what Marcus just said, to tee up the conversation, I want to start coming back around now to our wonderful panelists, good friends of mine, all of them for a long time. I'm super excited to have them. I'm going to start with you first, Barbara, and have you talk to me about, sort of what you're seeing in this overall pattern of communication. And then if you can also bring it down to the drowning in data-ness aspect. So communications and the drowning in data-ness aspect that you're seeing. You have to take yourself off of mute, I think.
Sorry. So one of the things that we have seen in Pickens that really came out last spring in the pandemic when we were 100% remote was that even though we had some standard platforms that we asked teachers to use for the purpose of communicating, some of them had gone off on their own to their own apps that they really liked. And so we realized pretty quickly that we had an issue, especially at the primary grade levels, K1, 2, with having, being able to, at least for a principal or at the district office level, to be able to see what that communication was and how it was happening. So even though we had an LMS that we had been using for years and said, this is the primary means of communicating. And one reason we do that is because then parents can choose the language that they receive that message in, so that removes one barrier. It also, principals can see all of the communications that are done, and it gives parents one place to look for messages, right? So when we, last spring, we were 1-to-1 in grades 3 through 12 and 1-to-3 in early childhood, and really by design, because we didn't want our kids on the screen all the time in early childhood. But obviously with COVID and sending kids home, that changed. So we were able to move 1-to-1 fully as we started this school year, and having to wrap, our hands around what were teachers accustomed to using, and different platforms that they had gone off to, and kind of working that in with our administrators over the summer and clearly communicating expectations to teachers was one of the big issues that we saw with communication. And I know that all 3 of my sons are either in college. I've got one who's out in the workforce now, but if you put yourself in the shoes of a parent with 3 children times 8 classes times potentially 24 different platforms and expectations for communication, it's a challenge. So I'll kind of toss the baton to the others and see what they have to say. But that was one thing we noticed.
Okay, great. Let's go to you, Matt.
Here, Barbara, I'm gonna make a profound statement here, and this one's free. This one's free for you. Communication, it's really hard. I mean, in a big district, no matter how many ways you send things out via your phone tree things, via local school communications, via website, via social media, via anything. It is just wow. It's a real difficult situation. But it was kind of interesting. During a year ago, we just finished school again because we finished before Memorial Day in Gwinnett. But you go back to COVID, everyone was 100% online, and whoever said it's right. I mean, there is a degree of teachers having to spend a lot of time tracking students down, and then we've gone and this past year. The number varies by school as to what percentage actually showed up in person versus being online. But a lot of our teachers, we had to because of scheduling, we had to do what we coined concurrent learning, whereas you've got some of us are online at home at the same time. I've got kids right in front of me, and that's of course that's a challenge. Some with communication and getting data and so forth, and just the whole general flow. It's pretty challenging situation, and so unfortunately next year by and large everyone's going to be face to face, or they're going to be totally online. So that'll be certainly be a help. So. Yeah, I mean that's in terms of supporting our teachers with that and giving them the information that they need, and the whole point of, the goal. I mean, you got to have a goal, right? I mean, we're not there. I'd be insincere if I said that. Well, with eCLASS, have everything in one place where you could do all your communication, all your lesson planning, your extension, your remediation, your everything can be all done easily in one place. Easier said than done. We're not there, but we're still working towards that. We're working towards getting devices to students. We don't plan on being one to one. We're trying to be one to need, I think is the one of the phrases that we're starting to use. But yeah, so LeiLani, I'm talking now. I've forgotten exactly what I'm.
Yeah, but I think you answered it really well, and you kind of gave us a little bit of a picture of the environment that you have, and it's a big district, but it's you guys aren't one to one, you're one to need, which is kind of an interesting position. But you've also taken a lot of leadership in building out eCLASS, which is also a unique thing that's one of the things that you guys are doing. I do want to go to Tisha and just ask kind of what's happening in Houston. You guys are huge. You're representing one of the many schools.
I'm just representing Heights. I can tell you my experience.
You're probably glad of that.
I don't know. It was very, very challenging. Communication, that was key, as we've all struggled with that, right? Yeah. For my campus, so we have our LMS system. We also have our SIS system. We had a new SIS implemented throughout the district this school year. So that was one form of communication, but to try to get the parents and students all set up on it, that was a little challenging. Mm-hmm. Luckily, we had our PTO bought us a license for Remind.com campus-wide. So all of my teachers had that Remind. We have one for each class, so parents join their classes that they needed, the teachers that they needed. So that way, that was one constant communication all the time. Somehow, some other schools in our district is under the Heights umbrella somehow, and they were always like, "Oh, thank you. We wouldn't know what's going on if you hadn't been sending out the remind." So anytime things went down, I would let people know, parents and students. Since the parents are at home keeping an eye on their kid, if our our LMS system wasn't working or something, they would be notified immediately. So that way they're not getting after their kid because they're not online, right? We also make sure constant updating our website. We have Twitter accounts, Instagram, Facebook. Our PTO also played a huge part in helping with the communication. So I was constantly in communication with PTO, and they helped me because it's very hard and challenging to do the remind, send out stuff through our hub, our LMS system, send it out through our SIS system. And then in case they miss that, we want to make sure it's on social media. So sometimes I felt we were over communicating, but our parents have always been appreciative of everything that we've been doing this semester, or this year, I should say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is interesting. So, you've got multiple channels, so that even makes it even more complicated because you've got your social channels and everything else. That's not fun. I can't remember to post everywhere I'm supposed to even post.
It's hard.
I know, Tisha. But it's good. I mean, all three of your organizations have an attitude of like, make sure there is communication. But I think what we really want to dig into now is the refinement of that. Like, where's that going? So, Marcus, I think you had in mind kind of some of the data, logistics of all of that. Like, let's bring this into like the data in use in the communication pattern. What do you guys see on your side for the data? So I can bring it back around to our three panelists.
Sure. Well, just very quickly on the communication side, though, that we would echo the sentiments from the rest of the panel, which is when the switch was flicked back in March of last year, and the decision was taken to go remote and to do hybrid or remote instruction, we saw an exponential increase, about sixfold, in fact, of communication immediately from that across our platforms, which you'd understand during COVID and the need to get information out and keep people informed and updated. The positive from that is now, as we kind of return to somewhat normality, is that communication levels continue at the same volume, which tells us, thankfully, that actually parents really do want to communicate. And the trick is to find the right medium that actually engages and reaches to parents where they're at. And there are lots of communication tools out there, but the reality is there's only a handful, or I'd like to say only one, but of course this is not a sales pitch, but you need to have it where those platforms are also paired with the data, because you can have lots of communications and that's fine. But the reality is that in order to get the responsiveness to those communications is that they need to be data informed communications. And to do that, those people who are issuing those communications need to have access to be able to extrapolate the data from those isolated silos and then present it in a format that means it's a meaningful data-informed conversation. And so we find that not every school, of course, every district, but there's a lot of challenges now, which is over the past 12 months, educators have had to deal with a whole range of new technologies and to embrace those. And they're frankly overloaded with that kind of learning capacity. So if you can make it simplified where everything is in one location, and to Matt's point, it'd be great to have a one size fits all does everything, but we're probably some way off from that, I'm afraid. But if you can put as much as you can within the single platform so that it's traceable, you can track it, it's all recorded, and it's one user experience to learn, and then I think that certainly moves in the right direction, and then it removes some of that timing that you referred to in the earlier slides about how much, that ridiculous amount of time that educators are spending outside of hours having to manage and deal with their daily tasks, typically rolling over into the evening time, because they're having to go through and learn all new technologies, go to different information points, wait for requests for data to be returned to them in some cases. It's a case of we have to allow teachers to do what they do best, which is teach. And so use technology to make it easier for them to do that. And there are ways to aggregate and to combine lots of those technology points into one platform to make it more simplified. There's no magic pill though, but that's what we need to work towards.
Yeah, I think you're totally right. And there's a question for you to go in and answer, Marcus, from Andy Scott. Andy Scott's from Rochester City School District. He's a data management specialist. Andy, I don't know if we can unmute you for a second, but you can make your comment, and then we have another comment, and then I want to go back to my panelists. Go ahead, Andy.
Can you hear me?
Yep. Hi, Andy.
Hi. I'm as we started the presentation and listening to the panelists talk about their individual districts, I know that here in Rochester, we again have tried to narrow the functional applications teachers can use to do their work with students, and also the communication pieces. And so we've tried to be careful about that, because it's very difficult to aggregate that data and have it be meaningful to make decisions, right? And so I'm wondering how tough it is in your districts to actually begin to say to teachers, regardless, K-12, pre-K to 12, here's what you can use, because these particular applications allow us to aggregate that data and make it meaningful for decision makers, make it meaningful for us when it comes to being able to look at whether the secondary or elementary or the middle schools are doing a better job of this communication process. One of the things that we did happen for us is we found that parent-teacher conferences during COVID really increased. They increased, the contact points increased across the board, no matter how teachers were doing those conferences, because we now had basically a captive audience. And so while the internet access and all those things, and we handed out the hotspots and all that were a challenge, we got to the point where we know that this works because all of the teachers were asked to use a common platform. Mm-hmm. And so listening to you guys as a data specialist, I get a little crazy thinking I'm going to have to pull that data from 8 or 9 different sources. It just makes me nuts to think about. And it makes what I do, trying to collect that data and synchronize it in a way that I can give functional feedback to the different buildings or administrators, much less the chiefs and the deputy superintendent and all those folks who need it, including my boss. Very difficult. It's a very difficult task. And I think, Marcus, what I heard you say is SchoolStatus is one of those tools that can do some of that. But even so, like all the tools out there, there's some limitations. So for me, part of it needs to be driven, and this is just the data guy talking. I'm the data janitor, right? I'm just talking, saying what we need to do is say to our professionals out there, you need to use these particular tools. I understand you like using it, but guess what? We can't have that if we're going to have meaningful impact of the data we're collecting.
Okay, well, thank you. Thank you. I'm going to come back to you on that, Marcus, so you can make more comments, but I want to go to the panelists now, and then I'm going to come back to somebody that was in chat as well, because they have another point about managing parents. But let's go to this data point. Barbara, you first. So what I was hearing is like the refinement of what you can say. I don't know that we're having teachers even aware that there's parameters. So the data glut and finding it and go ahead.
Well, I think those are like really, really excellent points. And I go back to like our own experience last year where we had a system in place, but because we weren't one-to-one, our early childhood teachers were not adopting our LMS because it really wasn't conducive to just being a communication tool, because they weren't one-to-one. And so they didn't feel the need to use it very often. We do not give letter grades in early childhood, so they didn't need to use the gradebook feature. So instead of using our LMS, which in our case is Schoology for communication, they were going out to other applications. I don't want to say any names, but then our 3rd through 12th grade, like we had that established. And so they knew that that was the tool that they were to use for communication. And so when we realized this was a problem last March, April, is when we had to just go back to our principals and say, this is a problem and here's why. And so, for example, we had scenarios where a special ed parent said, this conversation took place on blank tool. And because we couldn't see it, it was a he said, she said situation, and it became a legal issue. And so now our lawyers are saying, well, you need to go back and get that communication. Well, I don't have, it's not an enterprise application. I can't get to it. So now we have a legal situation involving a parent accusing a teacher, and then the principal, obviously you want to support your parents and the teacher, and now you're stuck because you don't know. And then you say to the parent, well, will you show me the message? No, but I'll show my lawyer. And so like that happened like 2 or 3 times in that early childhood special ed world. So that like when we had these conversations with our administrators, we're like, this has to stop. Like we've adopted a platform for a reason. And not only is it because it provides accessibility for parents across multiple languages, and it's one place where administrators can go see everything that the teachers are saying and doing, or what kids are doing. But it's more than just even aggregating data at a district level. It's about protecting our teachers. So we have a teacher who is made vulnerable because they chose to use an app that wasn't district approved. Let's not even talk yet about student privacy and the data that was shared with a third-party vendor without our knowledge about kids' personally identifiable information.
Wow.
And so that was problematic. So we had to get our principals on board and say, this is blocked. You cannot use it. This is the tool. Now, we still use Twitter. We use Facebook. We use social media from a district and a school level. But everything that's done on those social media platforms must also be done in our LMS for our non-English speaking parents and our non-social media parents. We have grandparents raising children who don't have social media. Now, we have grandparents raising children who are gurus at social media, but not everybody's on social media. Some people have purposely stepped away from it in the last year. Or over time, not just in the last year, although it seems that has been a common theme I've heard from many. But like, I do think having expectations, clearly communicating them, and then the principals have to hold their teachers accountable. So when they find out that they're using a different tool, they have to say, this has to stop.
Yeah.
But principals want to be able to be on the right side of the law as well. And so I think we had to have a couple of those legal issues, which thankfully for us never got beyond a threat of a lawsuit, but it could have been worse for us.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting dynamics here.
Yeah.
Okay. So Matt, you've already said communication is hard and interesting. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I've kind of written a couple of things down, just conversation points. One thing I second what Barbara was saying regarding like the people going off and doing their own thing with their own apps, and teachers, they're just trying to find something that's quick, simple, and easy, and they have no concept at all because it's just not the sphere not the realm they live in. With student data privacy and what happens with data and so forth, they have no idea. They're not being malicious or anything. But one thing that we've done over the last few years, and it's great. I mean, it was a little painful at first, but we've tried to really rein in the third-party apps and make these third-party people agree to our parameters of operation. And we've got, within our little portal that our teachers log into, that we've got right there on the front screen, there's a button, third-party vendor list. And your expectation is that you're using apps that are on that list and not using apps that are not on that list. And again, there's different tiers as to whether you can use it for everybody, or whether it's just for adults only, or there's just different parameters and so forth. Is it followed perfectly? No, but it's a whole lot better than it was, say, 3 years ago. For example, we've really reined that in a lot.
I'm seeing that in the data too, Matt. There used to be, the numbers of applications showing up in the reports that we're seeing are fewer.
Oh, really?
We're in a moment. Yeah, we're definitely in a moment of refinement to the best. Yeah.
Yes, agree.
Yeah, definitely. All right. So Tisha.
It's interesting talking about the third-party apps. We have a process here within Houston ISD. If there's something that a teacher wants, whether it's an app for Chrome or whatever it is, it has to be submitted, go through the process of being vetted to make sure our children are protected, right? And sometimes I work at a high school, and a lot of times some of my high school teachers are like, oh, well, we're just going to use this. And if I hear of them using, say, for example, GroupMe as a class communicator, I shut that down quickly. Anytime I hear them using something that I know is not, they're crossing that line of, the child privacy, I have the back end of my principal. We shut it down immediately. We're like, look, we have Teams, we have Remind, when we have our LMS, the hub. Those are your 3 ways, and also our SIS system. Do not go outside of that. You go outside of that, something happens, the he said, she said situation, you might be on your own. So that has stopped a lot of them from going outside of that, because we want to also protect the teacher as well as the student. If there's ever a he said, she said, I can pull up those reports from Remind. I can ask the district to pull up whatever. And that way we have, documentation to help protect everyone.
That's really smart. I know HISC even years ago had like the best vetting I've ever seen. I mean,
Yes.
you guys were serious. You were going in there and pretending to be certain types of people, and it's amazing work down there. Proud of you guys. So we have another dimension. I kind of want to not go to my next set of questions. I want to have Marcus make a comment, and then I'm going to pull up a commenter that we had, Lauren Ramo, if we can unmute her. Marcus, go ahead, and then we'll unmute Lauren.
Yeah, again, I would echo sentiments that have been mentioned. We do find that many districts we work with, they have a very colourful array of different programs and applications that are used for similar purposes. And I suppose the underlying reach to that is why. Is it because the standard or the preferred, perhaps chosen solution isn't quite meeting the needs of all the different stakeholders involved? But from a security perspective, I mean, yeah, when you're talking about parental communications and student information, it's critical that as part of that overall acquisition of a tool that you go through very extensive, and I can only speak from our experience, we go through a very extensive security protocols and process and look at what protocols and levers that you have in place in a district. And then we have a very fixed, formalized 6-week process to make sure that adoption and implementation meets all those different requirements and obviously for FERPA requirements and all the data privacy type areas. So particularly as most solutions as well as SaaS sort of up in that kind of cloud, aren't they? Where sometimes you worry about where that's going. But certainly, it's very much based on, I think, the whole implementation process and making sure that all different stakeholders sign on and use it and don't see the need to gravitate towards other solutions that perhaps aren't quite meeting their needs for whatever reason that might be.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. So I'm going to have Lauren tell us kind of what she was talking about in the chat, because Lauren, I think you're totally right. You were talking about, the deputization of parents right now has caused them to have they feel like they have way more agency, but that's a double-edged sword because now they can complain more and, weaponize their rights. Lauren, go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much, panel. I appreciate all that you're offering. I am a speech pathologist that I work in a public school system, and I'm finding that when we started this hybridization, it did deputize parents in a way that we had never seen before. Yes, they are the parents and they understand their children, but in a different mode than we were trained to understand their children. So now having all of this data in front of them and seeing the actual classroom happening in real time, it became a situation where the parents are now dictating to us how they want our instruction to be directed. And we are differentiating for all the needs of the students. But as a parent, I understand what's best for your child, but allow the professionals to do what they do best using research-based practices and what we went to college for. So it is a double-edged sword. But having all this data in front of us and in front of them, it becomes a very confusing situation to weed ourselves through. And I am looking for guidance as to how to be proactive with using the data to talk parents down off the ledge.
Yep. Yeah, I totally understand where you're coming from, Lauren. I think what we're dealing with, I'm going to have our panelists respond, but I think what we're dealing with is we've just added another personality type to the mix of everything we've got to deal with. And now we have to up the refinement of our skill in terms of teacher level communication. I think that's what's going on. So Barbara?
No, those are great points. And, just kind of reflecting on, the training that we do or don't give to our teachers on even how to communicate. So like a lot of things Marcus was talking about have to do with, just do we have a grasp on, how many people have read our emails or responded to the messages and, that kind of data. But when we're just talking about professionally dealing with communication, I don't know that we do a great job of that when it comes to inducting our new folks into the profession. So, we have people who do a really outstanding job with communication. And then, I do think that having certain protocols, I'll give you some examples. Like last year, and COVID, because it was so crazy, we had our superintendent was like, teachers can communicate as often as they want with parents, with their kids, like about their kids, because they're used to that. But he asked the principals to only communicate once a week, and we only as a district, and it was like every Wednesday you got something from the district. You weren't going to get it on Thursday. You weren't going to get it on Saturday morning. You weren't going to get it on Sunday night. Like expected at 5 o'clock on Wednesday. So we established protocols for with our community, like expect this. Like we understand you're overwhelmed. We're going to give you the bus information, the pickup food information, the, you know, what are our COVID numbers information, and we're not going to overwhelm you. So, you know, we're going to send this information out one day a week. You know, when it comes to teaching our teachers how to do that, I don't know that we've really done a superb job with that unless a principal has kind of established some expectations. So I'm making notes of that. That's something we probably need to add to our induction, you know, information. How often do we communicate with parents? How do we communicate? If there's a conflict, what's the best way? I mean, I've done that when I'm training leaders, you know, leading leaders. Like if you're overthinking an email, don't ever send it. Just pick up the phone or go to the school, right? Like if you're having to have somebody read your email, don't send it. Like, because apparently there's something there's something there that's causing you to say, I don't know how they'll receive it. So, I'm kind of open to that. I think that just training our teachers in how to communicate in certain circumstances would be excellent training. And I bet would be well received by our teachers.
Yeah, but also tying in what data you could share, should share at all, right? There's probably data that teachers have access to, they should not be sharing. Marcus, I'm going to come back around to you at the end here. Have you comment on that part? Matt, why don't you make a comment on this same topic?
Well, one thing I just note I'd kind of written down when I saw Lauren's comment there in the chat box is while I'm presently working in a blended type district environment. Prior to that, I was in an exclusively online environment, and shocking when students are at home with their parents and working with them. Wow, some parents they really help their kids a lot. I'll say it like that. At least in Gwinnett. I mean, I'm sure in Houston and you know, in Pickens, you don't have those issues at all. But no, but yeah, I mean, parents, wow, they'll aggressively help their students, and if the teacher doesn't go along with what their assessment of how their assignment should be graded and so forth, that's not always a pleasant situation. That's been people in online environments have dealt with that for an extended period of time, but it's very interesting seeing that teachers have that have been face-to-face immediately put into online or hybrid type environment, having to deal with that. And again, just trying to come back with communicating proper parental expectations, what parents should and should not be doing, and so forth. And again, they do have they have a lot of information there at hand, and trying to explain it to them is a real challenge.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I had heard more stories like that too, Matt, that some districts have reported to us, you know, that some of the parents were like, wow, you do all that? I watched you on the meeting and I was amazed. And, you know, and there was a lot of jokes going around. Parents go, you what? You want to leave the kids home with me in my home? What? They're gonna like there's been some moments where, you know, and then there's also the parents that have been just really nasty. Yeah, you know. Okay, so Tisha, what's been your experience? You probably have war stories. You don't want to...
Well, I've got scars. I'm just kidding. Well, you know, our parents, we've had a lot of parents step up, right? And then we have parents, they feel bad for the student because the student's probably up all night doing whatever. I mean, it is almost ridiculous how many messages, emails I know I get from students after 10 p.m. And I'm like, I don't answer anything after 6 from you all. But I kind of unfortunately was, what do you call him, an enabler. In the beginning, when COVID happened, I was the constant communicator, me and my principals all the time. And I got into the bad habit. If I saw something, I responded. Because to me, I'm like, they need to know. That's just my nature of helping. But now it's like, I need a break. And the parents are still emailing late at night. So are the students and the teachers. I also found out that also teachers were responding late after 12, after midnight. If the teacher's up grading, they'll go ahead and respond. I'm like, no, don't do that. Don't do that. We don't want to go into that gray area of, hey, you're communicating with my kid after midnight. Why? Even though it's related to an assignment. So those kind of things, I think many of us in education fell into that. We want to respond. We want to be helpful. We try to be empathetic. And now we're like, oh, wait, you don't text us, or not text, but, don't send us a message or an email after 8, or you just wait until you get a response. Sometimes I'll get the same email over and over 10 times because they wanted me to respond late at night. And I'm like, that's not going to happen.
Yeah.
But parents.
Super rude. Super rude.
Yeah. They expect you to jump. They really do.
Yeah.
And we've had parents who are kind and understanding. We've had those who are very aggressive. And sometimes they're frustrated with whatever's going on in their household. So I just let them, they like to vent to me. I don't know why. And I take it, I smile, like, okay. And then I get down to what the problem is. I've had to teach teachers to be firm with parents, especially when the parent calls and says, hey, my kid can't get into your class. What's going on? Or they can't log in. There's an issue. Well, I always ask the teachers, ask the parent to speak to the student, because 9 out of 10 times that student's still in bed. The parent is logging in as them. The parent is doing the stuff. And I'm like, you have to be firm, be nice about it, and be firm. Say, can I speak to the student? I can't tell you how many times I would get, well, they're still in bed, or they're not up yet. And I'm like, well, I'm sorry, I can't help you unless I'm talking to the student. It's to be, and I tell them, your student needs to be the one in class, not you. I'm sorry, and that's just, you had to learn to be firm. So I had some new baby teachers this year, so they had a hard time with it, but they finally got into the groove. I'm like, you just smile as you're talking to them on the phone. Say, I really need to speak to the student. I will help the student. I'm sorry. They need to learn how to problem solve. That's why I want to talk to them. Make it like you're trying to teach them something. So those were, I do have a lot of great stories, a lot of lessons learned. Yeah, I could go on for days, but I won't.
Yeah, well, what we're talking about here, you should make a little diary note and send it to us.
Right?
You can write a little editorial on it. We'll anonymize it, Tisha, so you don't name it.
Everybody, oh my goodness, it's Tisha talking. Yes.
But essentially,
essentially
everything we're talking about here is what education is moving into, sort of a golden age of administration that's tech augmented, right? There's areas coming out where, we need skills. We need these skills. And I think we all just threw you a challenge, Marcus. Everyone needs sort of a primer or a Q&A sheet, or a FAQ on what to do with X data, this kind of data, that kind of data. Never share this data with a parent,
Right.
I think that would be a great area of professional development, and you should do it, Marcus. I just dubbed you the guy who has to do it.
Well, I would implore you to look at our offerings in terms of having that best practice type discussions. But going back to the other comments made about obviously out of hours responses and things of that nature, again, it comes down to, I suppose, application implementation and selection in terms of being able to have a solution that sets office hours and you set expectations on day one when you start using tools, which is, this is the expectation. I think with any school district, if you implement any solution, the success or otherwise of that solution being used is based on that initial guidance and best practice type discussions on day one. And that also correlates to communication tools. If you give those tools to teachers, there has to be that day one experience. And then the first time you use those tools with parents, you then set those parameters and expectations. And many tools will offer, hopefully they should, the office hours type options. So that even if those responses come back out of office, when frankly teachers should not be upgrading at midnight or whatever it might be, then those don't come in at that point. And the parent knows that they're not being responded to, because that's the expectations that we set from day one. But certainly, yeah, we're not advocating that you provide full transparency of all data to parents. If you ask 100 opinions, then you know what happens in those scenarios. And obviously, from our point of view, that it's not a parent-facing solution. It's very much there to help educators and districts to formulate that data, aggregate it, and then choose which elements to share. And of course, there are certain elements that legally you have to share if asked to do so anyway. And so having that in an accessible format is certainly useful and required. But yeah, we take all those different information points and we'll aggregate them, but we do not advocate providing those a clear window to parents because they can't interpret that data. And so they often respond in a way that really the data doesn't deserve to be responded to because they don't understand it.
And I'd like to add, LeiLani, if I could, I'm kind of trying to categorize all these topics in my mind, and it seems like there's legal issues around how to communicate. Like what data can we share?
Yeah.
What apps can we use? How can we instruct kids to set up accounts? There's just legal issues. Then there's procedural best practices, which would be kind of what Marcus was talking about, even on the, you're not expected to answer email at this time, et cetera. Or the best, and we communicate that to parents, teachers may set up an after school office hour for 30 minutes from 4 to 4:30 or whatever it is. But then after that, there's no expectation. Procedural best practices like returning phone calls or whatever within 24 hours. And then I think there's best practices on how to communicate to get parents on your side. And I think back when I was a young teacher many, many years ago, taking a class called Parents on Our Side and really going through ways to communicate and work with parents to get them on your team. And I think that's a whole nother set of PD. So, yeah. What's legally required when it comes to communication and sharing of data? What's best practices? And then kind of what's the best way just to get parents to, know that you're all on the same team. And I think the first two, the legal issues and the best practices, can clearly be established and helped with from an administration level and should be. The other is how to get parents on your side is probably a skill set that over time that we've got to develop with our folks.
Yeah, and there's a whole thing that has to go on there. I'm sharing on screen right now a report that we did a few years ago as a starting point. You can download it off our site. But all the things you're talking about, like where we need to go, there's legal repercussions, there's stuff that we got to do with teachers. There's also a game called the Data Literacy Game that the Learning Council produces. And I think SchoolStatus is going to start helping us get that game more used by administration so people can understand data literacy. It's different than digital literacy, obviously. But the types of data you collect is unbelievable. And Matt, I'm going to have you talk about that next and answer what we're talking about. We're coming up to the top of the hour. I don't think we're going to get through everything we really wanted to, but this is such a good conversation. We want to keep going. So, Matt, your comments.
So I don't know, LeiLani. It's been just with everything. It's been a really interesting year and so forth. And we were just having a staff meeting earlier today, kind of talking about just how everybody is just our teaching corps is done. They're extremely tired. It's kind of an understatement. Even things like just trying to get teachers to sign up for things like summer staff development to learn more about, pick a topic, just anything. It's like I'm shocked. I was getting numbers about why it would be it's that low. It can't be that low. But no, I think they're done. I'm probably maybe not answering the question.
Well, you are in a way, Matt, because what you're saying is that the overwhelm of the change.
There's not much bandwidth left anymore.
People out, and we are seeing that. But I think it's also we'll have to have another conversation, Matt, because
there's just anything that we can do, to make things easier and all into one place and make things just easier and more conducive with teachers. No matter how great something is or some application or how we in our group here understand communication, how things tie together, rank and file teacher, they don't, I mean, they just don't see it that way.
Yeah.
I have to have a reality check. I've got people who give me reality checks and so forth. Yeah, I mean, it's a pretty interesting spot.
Yeah, we're in an interesting time. Well, Tisha's going to start a diary for me of lessons learned, right, Tisha? Go ahead.
I sure am. I will definitely do the lessons learned. I mean, this is actually, I'm coming down to the last few weeks here at Heights High School. I'm being promoted up into the district.
Yeah.
Yay.
Congrats.
So, and they finally have gotten their wish to bring me back up. So I have, lessons learned. The one thing I have learned is that the parents are key to make sure that their student is successful. So I attend the PTO meetings, and I'll do like 10-minute trainings with the parents. Like, this is what you can look at. So for instance, our LMS system, if they want to know why their kid is failing or what they haven't been doing, I've done a lesson on showing them where they can go and look and see how often their students logging in, what they haven't turned in, why aren't this teacher or the parents not getting the notification. Then they find out the kid has turned it off to them. So little tricks like that. And that has really helped grow our communication with, for us, our teachers and our parents, because it's just a lot of lessons learned, especially the last year and a half since we were shut down.
Yeah, what I really like about your attitude, though, and I think this is something we can all take away from today, is that you have an attitude of deputizing them. It's almost like mentally you and maybe there should be a physical orientation, like remember orientation when we brought all the parents in the building, where you're oriented now to the digital world too.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that more schools need to think about that. Like, here's your digital boot camp orientation, parent. And if you didn't attend, you have no right to say anything to me. Right. So,
basically, yes.
So just until you attend the boot camp, but I think that's that idea. And if every teacher could be imbued with that idea, hey, parent, you're on staff now. You're an honorary staff member and you have duties. And that kind of an attitude of deputizing them, and then the teacher having the attitude of, I've harnessed you to get some of the work done. I think a lot of times they just go into a counter antagonism mode, right? Where they're not thinking as a teacher, I need to use this person's energy in the direction of their own child to get the child moving, right? I don't know that they all think that way.
Yeah, we've done some digital
challenge.
parenting courses as well, and I think they've been just how to use the platform, social media. We had a school resource officer, local police officer, talk about what she sees with vaping and social media, and how to protect your kids and things you should be talking about at the dinner table based on different ages. And we did a series on that, and it was well received. If there's anything we've learned though, and we like to call this the 1921 school year, because it feels like we've been living the 1921 school year for 18 months.
Yeah.
And we'll be talking about this if we're granted
You mean 2021, 2021 school year, right?
And now I said 1921 school year. It feels like the 1920 school year bled like it never ended.
I agree. I totally agree with that. That's awesome.
It was the year that never ended. So I feel like we're finally closing out 1920 now. So it feels like we never ended the year. We never had the end of year celebrations. We never had beginning of year stuff the right way. It's so unusual for a system that's used to functioning on a yearly cycle. And so all of these things have made it hard for parents too, because they didn't have any of the traditional breaks in summer and all that stuff either. So it's been hard for a lot of people, but I'll be honest with you. I think for the most part, our students and our parents and our teachers have risen to the challenge, and we've seen a great deal of success, more so than we probably deserved for having dealt with something so challenging.
Yeah, and I congratulate all of you on that. Well, Marcus, I want you to invite everybody then to learn about the data etiquette. I think that's in some of your white papers. Can you wrap us up doing a little
Of
invitation
course.
to that
Yeah,
knowledge.
we would gladly have conversations with anybody to talk about the data etiquette and what granular level of data is available and how we can use it. I mean, we're at a fairly pivotal moment now, I think, in education and being able to, in having to use data where we had never had to use it before. I mean, even just the whole learning loss achievement gap, identifying students who have been left behind, even so much now as terms of funding mechanisms, getting the funding that you've been promised requires a lot of data analytics and ongoing analysis, which has never been the case before. And I think teachers still are somewhat looking at data as that kind of big dark science and who knows how it works, because they're just not used to it being accessible and available to them. So we can get over that kind of that pivotal moment and let them know that it isn't as scary as that, and the power of data, being able to very quickly identify and segment your students and be proactive rather than reactive. A lot of times we use data reactively. Child's absent, let's communicate to them and say, where have you been? But if you can look at historical trends and be proactive by using the data, you can almost kind of cut them off at the pass before they reach that tipping point and you've lost those students, which are very hard to recover. So yeah, I would encourage you to investigate further, and we're very happy to accommodate that. SchoolStatus.com, of course, and obviously we'll follow up after this presentation, but probably deserves another, I think, discussion because it's such a large, expansive topic that I do appreciate all the insights from all the panelists.
Yeah, and I appreciate all of you guys too very much. Barbara, thank you so much, my longtime friend. And Matt, you as well. Thank you so much. Say hello to everybody over there. I know a bunch of your crew. And Tisha, congratulations and thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, great. And Marcus, thank you so much. And yeah, I think we need both things to happen, everyone. A rise in the, how you train teachers, and a rise also in everyone's understanding of how to use data well and not like communicate wrongly to a parent by mistake. So this has been awesome. Marcus, thank you so much for sponsoring this conversation. It was awesome, but I'm going to release you all back into the wild now. I want to tell you one thing before you leave, and that is we have one more of our Hybrid Details Tour event, the Get Out of Your Seat Simultaneous Teaching, New Methods. And then we're going to be running a Summer Edu Jedi Camp, including games, including the data literacy game. So that Edu Jedi Camp is for you to get your badges, become a grandmaster, and be awesome all the way around. Not that you already aren't. So thank you guys again. And I'm going to release you back into the wild. Feel free to move about. And thank you so much. Goodbye for now.